welcome back to my channel. For today's video, I will be reading some poetry, but it's poetry by my favorite musical artists. Oddly enough, all three of my favorite musicians have released poetry books, and I decided it would be fun to read all of them in one video and kind of give my thoughts, my review, and just see how I feel about their poetry and if I think their poetry is similar to their music and how it makes me feel. I'm not a very critical reader in general, and I definitely have not read enough poetry in my life to critique it in any way, but I love all three of these musicians and I just thought it would be fun to read their poetry books. So the first one we have is Useless Magic, Lyrics and Poetry by Florence Welch, aka Florence and the Machine. This came out back in 2018. It's actually a pretty big book. There is a lot of interesting things in here, so I'm excited to read this. And then we also have Violet Bent Backwards Over the Grass by Lana Del Rey. This came out back in 2020 and it's a very aesthetically pleasing vintage type of poetry book. There's definitely some pretty long poems in here, so I'm excited to dive into this one and see how I feel about it. And then we have Generations of Women from the Moon, written and illustrated by Jillian Banks, who is known as just Banks. And this was published back in 2019, and I actually recently bought it earlier this year. I don't think you can actually purchase this anymore because it was available on her website, and I think it sold out the day she put it back up for a reprint. But if it is still available to buy, I will link it down below. I will be reading all three of these today and kind of giving my thoughts and just enjoying written words by my favorite artists. I decided to start with Useless Magic, which is Florence Welch's book, and I'm about 80 pages in. So far I'm enjoying it. I feel like there's not much to it because it kind of just feels like a big scrapbook with her lyrics. So the first little bit is her album Lungs, and it is just kind of a collage. So you have some pages with her actual lyrics to her songs from her album, and then you have kind of these doodles, I think, of things that she wrote over the years of the odd lyric here and there and things like that. It is cool to see that, I will say, her doodles and just her thought process. Some of it is really hard to read because I don't fully feel like I can read her writing. Some of it is kind of a little messy, but I think that also adds a little bit of charm to the book and just how Florence is, I guess, as a person. I feel like this book in general is a big nod to her creativity and just her whole thought process when it comes to writing and art. So now I'm into the ceremonials part, which is my favorite album from Florence and the Machine. The last album that's in here is High as Hope, and then we do get a little poetry section towards the back, so there is a full section with just poetry that is not anything from her music. So that I'm really interested in reading, but I'm gonna keep reading and keep flipping through this. There's a lot of interesting artwork and stuff, and yeah, as somebody who obviously loves her music and knows pretty much all of her songs, it is kind of not annoying, but it's just I am kind of flipping through the music part because I know her songs and I don't view that as original poetry for the book, if that makes sense. It would be different if like those were not actual songs, but because they are, I don't feel like it is adding much to the book itself, if that makes sense. But I am still enjoying it, and I'm gonna keep reading. So I finished Useless Magic, and I did enjoy it. I did actually like 2 of the poems at the back. So this book is around 280 pages. There were 16 original poems in here. So like this whole last little bit was just all original poems that wasn't anything from her lyrics and from her songs. There were 2 poems in here that kind of not really spoke to me, but I was like, oh, I really like that. So the first one is New York poem for Polly, and I liked the first like paragraph, I guess. My mother and father came to me in visions, and I can feel their arms of love stretch out across the sea, across time, across divorces, deception, and death. And I know that I am their daughter, and I know that they love me despite the damage. I just liked that. I don't know, I feel like that's really powerful. Even though like my parents are still together and like happily married, there is just something interesting about that paragraph. And then I liked the small poem here, which is called Rage. I am worried we are entering an age of rage, where only anger will be considered an asset, and the gentle will be mocked, then eaten. Those with soft voices will have their tongues cut out as punishment for not using them the right way. Don't you know your words are weapons? Kindness is obsolete as handwriting, as obsolete as silence and darkness in a city. I just thought that was a very beautiful poem as well. But yeah, overall I really enjoyed this book, but I didn't feel like it was as powerful and as special as I wanted it to be, I guess. I do feel like it would have been a little bit more powerful if we actually had original poems. But if you are somebody who's not fully familiar with Florence and her music, and you want to get more into her music and her lyrics, like this is definitely a good book for that, because you do get to see like all of her lyrics written out. And like I said, I do know a lot of her music, so a lot of it I was kind of just skimming. And it's funny because I would reach to certain pages and it's like I could hear the song in my head because I knew the song so well that like just looking at it and like reading it, I could hear it in my head. I do like how this book was put together though, and I like how each section of each album had a very specific color, and I feel like the book in general is very cohesive with the lyrics, the albums, and the art. Aesthetically, it's a very beautiful book. It is very artistic and full of interesting and unique drawings and pictures, and I do think it is a very, very beautiful book. I just thought it was going to be more poetry focused, and I mean, I guess if you do consider music poetry, then it is full of poetry, but to me it is more of a lyric book with some extra poetry and pictures. I don't really know what I should rate this. If I should rate it, I'm thinking it's like a 3-star out of 5 possibly. I don't know, I think I had higher hopes, if that makes sense. I did kind of want to share like my favorite albums and my favorite songs by Florence and the Machine, and kind of just, I guess, give a little backstory of like when I first listened to Florence and the Machine. I do believe Tumblr introduced me to Florence and the Machine, I'm pretty sure, and I do think it was the album Lungs, because I do remember very specific songs like Howl and Girl with One Eye, which are 2 of my favorite songs. I think those are both on Lungs. My favorite album by Florence and the Machine is Ceremonials. I love that album so much. It is so magical, so beautiful, so interesting. All the different sounds and instruments and the lyrics are just wonderful. It has kind of this like religious undertone, but it's also very creepy and scary. I think that's kind of a way to describe Florence and her music. But yeah, I love Ceremonials. My favorite songs are Lover to Lover, Seven Devils, Leave My Body, Never Let Me Go is a beautiful song as well. I love that song. Girl with One Eye said What Kind of Man? Oh, I love What Kind of Man. I think that's a beautiful song. And Long and Lost, I think are like my top favorites. I definitely have to like listen more to her newer albums. I don't listen to them as much as I listen to her older stuff, but after reading this, it really makes me want to go listen to all of Florence's songs. Like, I just really want to go listen to all of her music right now. I decided to start Generations of Women from the Moon by Banks, and I am about, I think I'm 26 pages in. Yeah, 26. And there are 56 pages. So I'm about halfway through. I'm enjoying it, but I feel like it's the type of poetry that is one full story. Like, each poem has its own story. There's not like one like paragraph or line, if that makes sense, that is jumping out at me, because it's a whole story. The beginning of this poetry collection starts with part 1 and part 2, and that's like a full-on like mini story, and then you kind of get into other poems and stuff, and then there's some beautiful artwork throughout the collection, which is beautiful. And obviously this is all drawings and doodles that Banks herself has done, because it is illustrated by Banks. Everything is kind of done in this, it's kind of like a taupe color. I really like how that's just like the tone of the whole book, and then you have, I think, like only 2 pages of actual like color, which is interesting. I'm liking it, but I feel like it's not hitting me that much. So far, the poems that I'm liking are A Piece of Grass. I really liked that. I'm not gonna read it all because it's like super long. And then Silly Old Boxer, I feel like that could have been a song. I feel like that could have been one of her songs. Mr. Fickle, I also really enjoyed. I'll read the whole thing because it's kind of short. Picks up a pickle so you could suck on something sour, like all of your words I choked on. Oh, Mr. Fickle, did you change your mind? You told me you'd get me at 8 to unwind. You said we'd drink a good bottle of wine, 'cause I'm with whom you said you wanted to dine. You had a lake in your big backyard, but it got so dry from the drought, it was hard. Full of ideas, you didn't have fear. Said follow me to the lake with some tears. You'll make the water I swim in more clear. You could see my thoughts in the lake that year. So far, I will say Banks's poetry is very much poetry. Like, it follows a very traditional view of poetry, I guess. There are some things where I'm like not really picking up what the meaning is, but I am definitely enjoying it, and I'm gonna keep reading, and hopefully I will find some other favorite poems in here. So I finished Generations of Women from the Moon by Banks, and I liked it, but I did kind of feel that I wasn't super obsessed with any of the poems. I often feel like poetry can be a very personal thing, and I do feel like these poems were very personal to Banks. So I didn't feel like there was anything that I could relate to or that made me feel anything, if that makes sense. I did end up liking An Ode to Myself. I thought that was a beautiful little poem, and I also ended up liking a part in You at Every Age. I don't want to show the art style because it's a little too risky for YouTube, but I ended up liking some of the lines in here. So I'll read an ode to myself because I thought this was a really beautiful poem. Ode to the fire in my belly, ode to the fullness of me, ode to the guttural laugh I let out without hesitation, ode to the wild woman inside me that creates. She is a beast, she is my best friend, and she is me. Ode to my inner masculine, I am sorry I have been ashamed of you. Ode to my inner feminine, for you are soft and maternal and fierce. Ode to the steps I take to keep trying. Ode to the crookedness in my teeth, for they make the crispiest of apples easy to bite. Ode to the days I feel dark, because I have gotten out of all of them. Ode to the days I feel happy, I was happy because I was full. Ode to waking up that night with the water bottle upside down. Ode to my lessons in letting go. Ode to the footprints that I sometimes need to step in twice. Ode to loving fully. Ode to being free. Ode to being me. I probably would also maybe rate it like a 3-star. I just wasn't fully obsessed with it, but I don't know, I'm not a huge poetry person, so I don't know, maybe it's just not my type of poetry, I guess. And I definitely could see some of the poetry being actual lyrics to a song. For example, Slurp could have been a decent song, or Son of a Gun. I don't know, I feel like there could have been some in here that would have been some of her songs. I think I first discovered Banks back when her first album came out, and I think it was also popular maybe on Tumblr, or maybe I just came across it on YouTube. I don't fully remember how I discovered Banks, but when Goddess came out, her first album, I was obsessed with it. I absolutely loved it. And then I remember The Altar had come out, and I never really listened to it until maybe like 2 years ago. But then her third album came out, absolutely loved it. I was obsessed with 3, such a fantastic album, and I re-fell in love with The Altar. And her 4th album recently came out, Serpentina, which I also really love. Banks genuinely has such a unique sound. She is so original, and she loves autotune, but not in the way that like she can't sing. She uses it as an instrument and as like a sound, and it just works for every song that she uses it in. I love how each of her albums have a different sound, but they all sound very cohesive. I think they just sound like Banks. My favorite album from Banks is definitely The Altar. I just love all of the songs, all of the lyrics. My favorite songs by her are Brain, Begging for Threads, Mind Games, Trainwreck, Weaker Girl. Oh, I love the lyrics in Weaker Girl. Judas, Poltergeist, Propaganda, and more recently, Dead End. I genuinely love so much of her music, and I am kind of sad that I wasn't super obsessed with this, considering I actually did spend quite a bit of money on this. I bought this and it was a little expensive, but this is kind of, you know, a little collector's edition, a little collector's piece here, and I did have an enjoyable time reading it. Okay, so I'm basically halfway through Violet Bent Backwards Over the Grass by Lana Del Rey. There are no page numbers, so I kind of just guessed where would be like the halfway mark, and I'm really enjoying this. It feels a lot like Lana's music. It feels like the music that she has in Blue Banisters and Did You Know There's a Tunnel Under Ocean Boulevard. Like, a lot of this feels like fingertips. I don't know why I feel like poetry needs to be like personal, that I need to have a personal connection to it to enjoy it or to like relate to it, but I really am now thinking that I don't need to feel that way. but it is nice to feel some sort of connection towards it. But yeah, this feels like exactly like Lana. Even the pictures are very like LA, vintage. So far, my favorite poems are LA, Who Am I to Love You? It's a very long one, so I will not be reading this, but I really loved this poem. And I also so far really loved Sports Cruiser. This was a really interesting poem and I really loved that. It seems like also Lana just free types this on a typewriter and made corrections and like fixed things, because you can see like whiteout marks, you can see where like she crossed things out, and I really like that touch. I think it makes it more personal, if that makes sense. Like in here you have kind of like this was like the rough draft, and then this is the final piece. I really love that. I think it adds a personal little touch to it, and it is kind of like an insight to her mind and how she creates poems and stories, I guess. So far this is my favorite one out of all three that I've read, but I'm gonna keep reading and we'll see if I find some other poems that I really, really love. So I finished Violets Bent Backwards Over the Grass by Lana Del Rey. I have to read it every time I say it because I always want to say violence or violent instead of violet. This feels like Lana's music. It feels very poetic. It feels very deep. It feels very personal. I like how it was not only poetry, like a lot of things rhymed, but also there were like stories. Like there was a beginning, a middle, and an end. And the end always just felt like it wrapped everything up in the poem, if that makes sense. I don't really understand the point towards the back here where there's just like lines and pictures. I am wondering if like it's supposed to be a, oh, make your own poetry type of thing. And I like how she had some shorter poems towards the end. She had some haikus at the end, which was kind of just a nice little sweet thing to end the book, because I feel like, you know, she had some really like long, heavy poems here, and it felt nice to kind of end the book with something very sweet and simple. I believe Lana also narrates the audiobook, which I was debating if I wanted to listen to the audiobook and like follow along, but I decided to just read it for myself. I think maybe at some point I will possibly maybe want to reread this with her audiobook, but I really enjoyed this. I thought it was really good, and I probably will still give it like maybe a 3.5, maybe almost a 4. I definitely did like this more than the other two poetry collections that I read. It just felt very much like Lana, and that's kind of what I want to feel when I'm reading a musical artist's poetry book. Like I want it to feel like how I feel about their music, right? Because I love their music and I'm obsessed with their art for a reason, and this just felt like an extension of Lana's art. When it comes to Lana, I actually do remember vividly how I fell in love with her music. I of course discovered her on Tumblr on the very early days. I think it was right before her EP had come out that had Video Games, Blue Jeans, and Born to Die on the EP. I think it was, I want to say like a couple of weeks or months before her iconic SNL performance, because I did watch that live. I did watch that live years ago. So I discovered her not when she was like Lizzie Grant, but basically when her big first like Lana Del Rey break happened, essentially. And then I obviously discovered all of her unreleased music, and then I fell in love with her very first Lana album, which was Born to Die. My favorite album from Lana Del Rey will forever be Ultraviolence. That album came out in 2014 when I was graduating high school. So I have some very fond memories and just life attached to that album. But I obviously love pretty much all of Lana's albums. I will say the one I'm least connected to is Chemtrails. I don't listen to that one as often as all her other albums, and I would say Blue Banisters a little bit just because it's quite slow, and I feel like, you know, you have to be kind of in the mood to listen to some sadder, slow music. Over the years, I would say I grew more of an appreciation for Honeymoon and Lust for Life. I remember when those two albums first came out, I wasn't the biggest fan because I felt like she was going into more of like a pop genre, which I wasn't super in love with, but I've grown to love those albums now over the years. And I mean, Lust for Life has 3 of my favorite songs towards the end of the album. But yeah, Ultraviolence is still my #1 favorite album. Off to the Races, Ride, West Coast are some of my favorite songs, as well as Black Beauty. I wrote them all down because I was trying to like think of what are my favorite Lana songs. But Black Beauty, The Blackest Day, God Knows I Tried, Heroin, Change and Get Free, those are the 3 final songs on Lust for Life, and I truly think that those are masterpieces of songs. You literally have to listen to them back to back. So Heroin, Change and Get Free, those I feel like are a trilogy of songs that you need to listen to all together for them to like make more sense. I love Living Legend and Nectar of the Gods, and more recently Let the Light In. I really love it. Such a beautiful song, as well as Margaret. And I do really love A&W. I think it's a very unique song. It mixes kind of like Lana's Ultraviolent sound, but also gives very much like Born to Die Lizzie Grant vibes. So I do love A&W. I would say Lana is my favorite artist of all time. I absolutely love all of her music. I mean, I listed pretty much like a bunch of her songs because I could never really pick one favorite Lana song. I feel like it always changes, but for the most part, I love her more, I guess, like depressing, dramatic songs, which is really sad to say because obviously I don't ever want Lana to feel sad and like make music off of her sadness, but I do love a lot of her really depressing songs. So after finishing all 3 of these poetry collections, I feel like I haven't really discovered anything particularly new or super interesting about my favorite musicians, but I did enjoy reading their poetry and reading a different medium of their art. I will say Lana's poetry collection definitely stood out to me the most. I feel like it definitely was an extension of her art and her creativity. I could even see a lot of her poems becoming actual songs and stories that she would say in some of her songs and music. It didn't feel like it was trying to be very like poetic and to be poetry. It felt very much like a story, but also told in a beautiful way that I feel like is poetry, if that makes any sense, which probably doesn't. Banks's poems I felt like were really interesting, and I did like, you know, at least 3 of them. But again, some of them felt like they would be probably better off as actual songs. I didn't feel like I was super connected, or I didn't feel like, oh wow, that was a poem. You know, I didn't feel that way. I was like, okay, like, you know, it's a story, it's something. But I definitely connect way more to Banks's actual music and a lot of the lyrics that she has in her own songs. And for Florence's poetry, I did enjoy, oh gosh, I don't even know how many poems I said there was. I think there's like over 10 or something, and I really connected with 2 of them. But I will say that sometimes Florence has this way of writing things that I do feel like kind of go over my head a little bit, just because she uses a lot of metaphors and a lot of things that I feel like I would really have to digest to fully understand. I think in general this is just a very pretty lyric book, aesthetically pleasing. You know, it has a lot of pretty pictures and art and kind of an insight to Florence's creativity and just like the way that she perceives art. And obviously she chose all of these pictures and all of these scribbles and all that stuff, so there was a very conscious choice in what she chose to put in this book. I don't really know much about Florence and like her upbringing or her childhood. Same for Banks. I don't really know a lot about like her upbringing. I feel like I know a lot more about Lana's. There is a poem in here, American Mother, and I don't know if this is relating to Florence, but it does seem like she had an American mother and a English father or something like that. So that was kind of interesting. I feel like I need to dig a little bit deeper into Florence's life, I guess. In a way, it did make me appreciate her music, and like I said earlier when I was reading this, I kept hearing the songs in my head because obviously they were all written down, and it really made me want to go and just listen to all of her music all night. Even though I didn't fully love every poem and every story, I still really enjoyed reading everything that my favorite musicians have created. It was really interesting to see a different side of them that isn't music, a different art. I do think if you are a huge fan of any of these artists, I do recommend picking up these books. Did I feel the same about their poetry as I do their music? No, but again, it was just nice to see a different side of these artists and get to see them in a different creative light, I guess. But yeah, I really enjoyed reading these and it was fun. It was a fun experience, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you have read any of these books, let me know what you think about them, or if you love any of their music, let me know your favorite album by Lana, Banks, and Florence, or your favorite song by them. I would love to know all of that down below. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to give this video a like, subscribe, follow me on all my other social media, and I will see you in my next one. Bye!